So apparently bidding wars are back according to real estate professionals and a handful of people on Reddit, but I wasn't necessarily convinced. So I'm going to dive into this. We're going to look at one specific property that got 85 offers, and I'm going to talk about why it serves as a bit of a case study for a few key points that I think are important for looking at Toronto's real estate market heading into 2024. Number one is that people are generally unaware of seasonality, and that includes buyers and the real estate professionals that represent them. Number two is that bidding wars are a symptom of a bigger problem. The real estate industry is kind of broken. Number three is that there's a lot of demand below $1 million. Property that had 85 offers on it. Once you see what it sold for, it'll tell you a lot about what's happening in the market. And number four is that bidding wars don't necessarily mean that we're back in a bull market. So the original post was actually deleted on Reddit, but fortunately Nazma, who is a contributor on Twitter and top Toronto realtor, had the foresight to post a screenshot on Twitter, which you can see here. One thing that stood out to me was that the author had a sentiment that there was a run-up similar to what we saw in 2022, and I'm not sure if they're trying to imply that it could blow off the same way or if we're seeing a strong, exuberant spring market. It may actually be worth considering a comparison to last year's spring market, which was the largest price growth we've seen in Canadian history. And we know that last year wasn't an exceptionally positive year for Canadian real estate. If the prices do rise the way that they did in the spring, very few people can afford to buy. And last year we finished with the lowest sales volume we've seen since the 1990s. So the comparison between the spring markets of 22 and 23, it shows that we're seeing an increase in the number of bidding wars with a high number of bids on those bidding wars. But sold prices remained within reason. We haven't really seen the percentage sold over asking going up in a substantial way. You can see a great seasonal or annual price trend comparison by PH Floor, one of my favorite contributors on Twitter. I might just use this as an opportunity to direct people to looking at this chart and seeing the ebbs and flows that take place in price throughout the year. So you'll see that prices rise in the spring, they fall in the summer, they rise in the fall, and then they fall in the winter. And the steepest line, the biggest jump up that you see in price, takes place from January into February, which is the period of time that we're in right now. Another reason that you can see this take place is because of the frequency of offer nights or bidding wars being used as a strategy jumps up during that same period of time. Rob Marsiglio, who's on here on YouTube and is an awesome follow on Twitter, did a really great analysis on this, documents the jumps from offer nights in December into January. And it shows where that jump in January is the biggest jump that you typically see in a year. So what happens during this period of time is at the beginning of every year, there's kind of this period of frenzy like the one that we're seeing, where before spring market supply comes online, there's confusion. A lot of buyers have entered the market. Let's say in January, at the beginning of the year, you have all of the buyers that you're going to have for that spring market. And some of them are out looking, and maybe you've had new buyers added to the market because over the holidays, they were hanging out with their family, and their family was like, you need to buy a house and we're going to gift you a down payment or whatever. And you see very little supply in the market, but there's a lot of buyers. And then over time, those buyers start buying and there's fewer buyers. So now we know there was 300 showings on this property and 85 offers. So there was 84 other buyers willing to make offers and 300 other buyers willing to look at properties that are priced like this one. According to this next chart here, you can see a little bit of a rise in the percentage of properties that are selling over asking price, but we're not really entering a highly competitive market. It's still well below the numbers that you're seeing from last year, where 40 to 50% of properties were selling over asking price. So we're not really in a bidding wars are back scenario. To be honest, they never really left, and I'm going to get to why that is. So the increase in bidding wars in January isn't really as substantial as people want to make it sound. And the other piece that I would say is that you're not really seeing a huge bump up in the average price of properties. And this is where I think it's worth noting a phenomenon that takes place every year, and it just shows me that a lot of people don't understand seasonality, including the real estate professionals who are representing these buyers, because a lot of people really want to blame the listing agent. I agree for the most part. I'm not a fan of the bidding war practice, but a lot of the buyer's agents are inexperienced as well, and that in itself is a problem that I'm going to describe later on. But at the beginning of the year, all of these buyers enter the market. I don't know why, but in January, buyers go a lot harder than they do any other time of the year. Probably, something to do with new year, new me, annual goal setting. We're going to buy a house this year, whatever it is. And then you also get this gap where nobody's really buying in November, December. And so that kind of creates this little pent-up demand scenario, and it's like a slingshot that unleashes in January. And so you have all of these buyers, this bigger pool of buyers. Maybe some kids get a down payment gifted over Christmas, like I mentioned. So let's say that in January you have most of the buyers for this year's spring market, and they're out looking for houses. And then over time they trickle off. Your number of buyers actually decreases throughout the spring market, and that kind of could cause that plateau in price. But you get a lot of eager buyers who want to front run the spring market. There's not much supply because January and February suck for selling a house. So as a result, the market is kind of in this temporary state of excess demand. And this is what we're seeing. Like a bidding war of this magnitude is a sign of excess demand, but it doesn't mean that the market is going to be in excess demand for the entire year, or it doesn't mean that the market is ripping upward. And I'm going to get to that because there's some charts that I can show you that explain the exact opposite actually. So what happens is, and this is how seasonality works, but this is also how basic supply and demand works. This is how buyers and sellers, or demand and supply, meet at an equilibrium price. So what happens is buyers rush into the market, and sellers see that buyers are rushing into the market. They see things like this property that just had 85 offers. They see that house prices are going up in the steepest incline that they ever do throughout the year. I'm going to show you on the next chart as well. And so sellers start saying, wow, that's a price that I would be happy with. I got to pick up the pace and start listing my property so I don't miss this opportunity. And then you see a supply flood as a response to a demand flood, or you see supply come in as a result of excess demand. And what happens is now all of a sudden there's more options, buyers can shop around, and they're not overpaying or not paying as high for houses that are on the market. At this point, price growth would settle. Listings might actually start coming off the market because sellers can't get a good enough offer and they don't want to have their house up in the summer. And this is how you go from excess demand, where it drives price up, and then a scenario of equilibrium where the price settles or even comes down, which is what happens on a seasonal basis in the Greater Toronto Area. So a lot of this price growth also happens as a result of a skew in data. So both the average and median price actually get skewed upwards. The easiest way to understand this is as follows. So families buy homes in the spring, typically, because they want to move and close during the summer break between school years. Families have more people, so they need bigger homes. Bigger homes are worth more money. So more homes worth more money are selling in the spring than any other time of the year, and so you see this increase in the average and median prices. But the fascinating part here is that if you look at it on an annual basis, prices aren't even rising in the Toronto real estate market. The seller's market is actually chasing the buyer's market down. So let's assume that all buyers are willing to pay 110% of asking price. But sellers are continuing to underlist because of this bidding war strategy and because of this bidding war phenomenon, which listing agents keep using. And I think a lot of sellers really like the strategy because it means their property only has to be off the market on the market for a week, and they get all the showings out of the way and they get an offer. Let's assume all of the buyers that I mentioned at the beginning of January see a house, this house as an example, that they feel appears to be at a 30% discount. I can't really blame them for wanting to go out and give it a shot, right? And in a lot of cases, their realtor maybe should be telling them that it's worth $950,000, not $750,000 that it's listed for, or that maybe they'll see more supply in the spring market. We typically see the most listings in the spring market between March and April, and so maybe they should wait to see if something else comes in rather than getting into this massive bidding war scenario. I think that this is the point where it's worth acknowledging that there is a much bigger problem here. Last year, the average number of deals per realtor was below 1.5. This means that there's a statistical likelihood that you're the only client that your real estate professional represents in any given year. And that to me is probably the core problem here, is that yeah, you have listing agents who are taking advantage of buyers and their agents who don't know what the house is worth, what a fair price to pay is. The fact that disconnect exists in the quality of agents, who the listing agent being a top agent who really understands the market, and the existence of buyer agents who aren't top agents who don't really understand the market, that exploitation leaves room for a buyer to potentially overpay. So I guess the question here is, do I think that this property could have sold at the same price with 90% fewer showings and 90% fewer offers if it was just listed at the same price, let's say $999? Probably. I mean, I think the listing agent indicated that they feel that they sold the property for 7% more than market value. So maybe this did create a little bit of an advantage for the seller. Maybe it did create a little bit of a loss or an inefficiency for the buyer pool. I do think it's a little bit economically wasteful to have 84 sets of buyers go through the work of preparing offers, several hours worth of work, back and forth, getting their hopes up. And then also the 300 showings that took place during that period of time. I mean, if you were just to say, okay, every party who looked at the property, their time is worth, actually calculate the cost of all of those viewings, it would be a pretty profound number that you would come up with. I did this on a LinkedIn post in 2021 where I analyzed the economic waste of bidding wars. I'm not a fan of the bidding war strategy, but who am I to say here? I mean, like I mentioned, the listing agent is a top agent in the city of Toronto. So the other question is, did the listing agent do their job and represent their client's best interests? And I would say in that case, the answer to the question is yes. And that really is their only job. Like, everybody wants to demonize the listing agent. I've already explained why I think there's certain reasons that that's okay, but I also think that they really only should care and have to care about one person's opinion of them, and that is the seller of the property, which is their client. So the question is, who is the bad guy here? Is it the listing agent who underlisted and created this waste that I described, or is it all of the agents who didn't realize that it was underlisted and didn't realize that it wasn't necessary to pile into the only listing that's available in January because there's going to be more supply in February and March and April? And so I think that this disconnect between better, more shrewd, more powerful agents and weaker, newer, inexperienced agents is really the fundamental reason why Toronto real estate is broken, why things like this are able to take place. The last piece that I would really want you to kind of latch in on is the price at which the house sold for. $999,999. Not $1 million, not $1,001,000, $1 less than $1 million. Why this number? From my perspective, this tells me that the property was likely pursued almost exclusively by first-time homebuyers. How do I know this? It's pretty simple. That price is a price that would be paid by somebody who is using an insured mortgage. So that could be insured by either Genworth, CMHC, or Canada Guarantee. So of 85 offers, there wasn't one buyer willing to pay a penny more than $1 million for this house. Why not? To answer the question, why don't we look at CMHC's general requirements? So it says, for CMHC insured mortgage loans, the maximum purchase price of a property is $1 million. So typically, first-time homebuyers intend to purchase with less than 20% down payment. If you don't have a down payment of 20%, you need CMHC mortgage insurance or Genworth or Canada Guarantee mortgage insurance. CMHC won't insure mortgages over $1 million. So if you're a CMHC insured borrower, you can't spend more than $999,999. There are at least 279 buyers looking for this type of property, looking at this type of property. And at least 85 who are looking seriously enough that they're willing to offer on the property, but not a single one can pay more than $1 million. Almost all are using insured financing. Most of these buyers are likely first-time home buyers. Shows me that any examples that we're seeing of exuberance and strength in the real estate market exists below that $1 million mark. And this is what I would call price floor growth. And so the price floor is basically cemented by insurers, CMHCU, the taxpayer, Genworth, and Canada Guarantee. And this also means that any growth that we're going to see in the real estate market this year would have to come from that price floor being pushed up. And you could see this, you're hearing about CMHC selectively increasing the insurable amount on mortgages in certain cities. The fact that this is being driven by first-time buyers from my perspective, or less experienced buyers from my perspective, is another symptom of this bigger problem. These buyers, this type of buyer, typically is less experienced. Well, if you're buying your first home, you have zero experience. And so you've never bought a home. You don't know that the spring market is coming. You don't know that there's more supply. It's very easy for you to get captured by things like FOMO, the fear of missing out. First-time buyers likely don't have the necessary experience to select a good agent, and so they can often end up in situations where they're ill-advised or working with a more amateur real estate professional, where on average it's likely that you could be the only deal that that professional does this year. And it's worth noting that the highest number of realtors do 0 deals per year. The other piece is that these buyers are incredibly high leverage. Let's do the math here. So CMHC charges a 4% premium to ensure a 95% loan-to-value mortgage. That gets added to the principal. That means the borrower has 1% equity when they take possession of the house. And that's not including land transfer tax, lawyer fees, and other closing costs like moving. So in order to sell that house, that now owner, that buyer, would have to probably incur switching costs of about 5%. They have to pay a realtor, a lawyer, moving, mortgage discharge penalties, etc. So that buyer would have a minimum of a 4% equity shortfall. You can repeat this math at 90%, where the premium is 3.1%, which leaves you with an original equity of 6.9% before you have to pay your realtor commission, lawyer, land transfer, mortgage discharge, etc. So from my perspective, seeing all of these buyers play in that sandbox makes me a little bit fearful. There's a high risk when leverage is high. And the last thing I want to look at, and this was pointed out by some of the great comment threads, Twitter and Reddit really liked this listing because it was a good case study, because it was listed so close to its 2017 sale price. So on October 27th of 2017, this same property sold for $735,000. And that's after the exuberance of 2017 took place. This is in October, after prices had crashed. Actually, one of the biggest price crashes we've seen in Canadian history took place from April to October of that year. And so this property was listed a couple of days ago in January of 2024 for $750,000. So just above, let's say they're pretty much the same price. So that must be, and this house, everybody wants to say, okay, this house had 85 offers. It must be a sign that the market's ripping, spring market's in here, it's bullish again. It's a great case study because the property was listed at $750,000, and with 85 offers, it sold for about $1 million. This is only a 35% increase from the sale price in 2017. So let's annualize that out. 7 years have gone by. If you just divide 35 by 7, you would get 5% per year. Or you can actually use a compound annual growth rate, because growth stacks on itself over that period of time. Compound annual growth rate, that is a 4.38% growth in price that we saw. Just above the 100-year average house price growth for Canadian real estate, which is 4.11%. So either this is bullish rocket fuel, like a lot of people want to make it out to be, or it is just an indication that the market is literally growing at its 100-year average price and has been doing that since 2017. What do you think? Leave me a comment. I'd love to have a discussion about it, and please subscribe to the channel. I really appreciate it. It kind of helps me want to keep putting videos out.